So we're going to start with an empty 3D project. The first thing we're going to do is create some folders to organize our project. So we're going to need folders for materials, scripts, scenes, and prefabs. Now we're going to go to the materials folder that we made earlier and create two new materials and give them each a color. Once finished, spawn a plane so that we have something to actually spawn our prefabs on, and then drag one of the materials we just created on it to change its color. Next we're going to create the prefab. First of all, we need to spawn it in the scene. I'm just going to spawn two cubes, move one a bit and make it the child of the other by dragging it onto the other cube in this scene hierarchy. Then just apply your materials to the cubes. And then to create the actual prefab, we need to navigate to our prefabs folder in the Project Explorer at the bottom of the screen and drag the scene objects that we want to turn into a prefab into that folder. If we wanted to edit the prefab further, we can click on it in the project view at the bottom of the screen and then click on Open Prefab in the inspector. From here we can do lots of things. We can, for example, add more items to the prefab, change the positions of each game objects in the prefab, and add components. But for now I'm just going to leave it as it is. Next, navigate to your scripts folder and create a script called CS Object Spawner and open it in Visual Studio. Firstly, we're just going to spawn a prefab at its default position. To do this, we just need one variable which holds a reference to the prefab that we actually want to spawn. So write serialize field in square brackets so that we'll be able to see this variable in the inspector, and then below that create a private game object called prefab reference. Now we can simply spawn the prefab using the default instantiate function and passing through the prefab that we actually want to spawn. Go back to Unity and in the scene view, delete our original prefab from the scene hierarchy and create an empty and name it prefab spawner. Then we can drag the script that we just created onto the prefab spawner game objects. And then we can see in the inspector on the right hand side that there is a slot where we can now drag our prefab into. Once done, we can now press play and see that the prefab is spawned in its default position in the middle of the plane. So to go further on this tutorial, we are next going to make the prefab spawn at the position of our mouse when we click. So head back to our script in Visual Studio. Firstly, remove the instantiate function from the start function that we wrote earlier, and in the update function we're going to write an if statement that checks if the user has clicked their left mouse button. Inside that if statement we are going to create a vector3 which grabs the mouse position from Unity's input class, and then we are going to perform a raycast to see where the user has actually clicked. Create a ray variable and call it castPoint, then use the screenPointArray function on the main camera and pass through the mouse position that we just grabbed. This tells us where in the world the user has clicked in reference to the camera. Next, we're going to create a raycast hit variable that we can store the hit information in from the raycast we're about to do on the next line. So write an if statement below that and write physics.raycast. We're then going to pass through our castPoint variable, our raycast hit variable. We're then going to use the mathf.infinity for the raycast distance and pass through the everything layer for what we actually want to hit. If the raycast succeeds, it means the user has clicked on something in our scene, meaning we can actually spawn the prefab. So to move the prefab after we have spawned it, we're going to need to temporarily store it in a temporary game object variable so we can access its transform. So create a game object variable and set it equal to the instantiate function that we used earlier and pass through our prefab. This will store a reference to the newly spawned prefab in the temporary variable. On the next line, we can then set the position of the newly spawned prefab to the hit point of our raycast. Then we can go back into Unity and test that it works.